Hey there, everybody. My name is Cliff Murphy. I'm the Director of Folk and Traditional Arts at the National Endowment for the Arts. Our COVID policy prevents me from being with you today, but I want to say that it's an honor to be here with such a great group of people. Um, the National Endowment for the Arts Folk and Traditional Arts program manages about $4 million worth of funds annually. Most of that's provided through project grants in folk life and cultural heritage, and an annual support for state folk life programs. We also administer the National Heritage Fellowship, which is the nation's highest honor in the folk and traditional arts. Most recipients are only famous within their cultural communities, but there are some household names, such as soul singer Mavis Staples, blues singer John Lee Hooker, and most pertinent to today's conversation, the godfather of go-go, Chuck Brown. I was introduced to Natalie Hopkinson in 2019 through our mutual friend and colleague, Sojin Kim, at the Smithsonian Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage. In addition to meeting a remarkable scholar, community advocate, and dynamic connector in Dr. Hopkinson, her work reminded me of why I started working in this field in the first place. I grew up in the state of New Hampshire, which is, of course, not at all like Washington, D.C., except for two factors. Both places are regularly overrun with tourists who are more interested in the landscape than in the people, and both places are seen by the outside world as a stage for political theater. They're not understood by outsiders as a place or a group of communities endowed with their own distinct culture or cultures. When one's home space is seen as a venue for and about others, it can be infuriating. And so for me, I set out on my own career path in part because I wanted to use my own agency, with a lowercase a, to work with communities whose distinct cultural practices were being drowned out by mass culture. To me, the work that Natalie was doing at Howard with Don't Mute DC resonated on both a personal and professional level. So, what is folk life as a discipline and as a tool for inclusion in arts policy? This is a question that Natalie had hoped that I might touch on today. Folk life is generally speaking, the activities and traditions of a particular group of people. I think of it as vernacular culture, the music, dance, language, work, and rhythm of everyday life, the things that reside in oral tradition, the things you're more likely to learn in the kitchen or in the club or on the shop floor than you are in the classroom or in the conservatory. Folk life is passed on from generation to generation, and it encompasses things like your grandmother's mac and cheese recipe, the language you speak, the accent you have, the way you play guitar, or if you play guitar, what beats you emphasize in music and dance, what prayers you may say in earnest or in jest, the style in which you insult your friend's mother, and so on. In other words, it ranges from the sacred to the profane, and it's the stuff that gives our lives meaning. It makes our families and our neighborhoods distinct. And it's a source of pride, of pain, of embarrassment, and is frequently critical to our health and well-being. Folklife work, which usually goes under the umbrella of public folklore, is the professional field that seeks to serve the practice of folklife or to illuminate the practice of folklife. Public folklorists seek to document, sustain, interpret, and present living traditions. The most prominent historical figure in the field of public folklore is Alan Lomax, whose career is closely associated with Woody Guthrie, Jelly Roll Morton, and Leadbelly. But Lomax was part of a growing group of folklorists, anthropologists, and sociologists, including Elaine Locke and Zora Neale Hurston, who were concerned about the emergency of global and mass culture in the 20th century, as well as the manner in which folklife and cultural heritage was weaponized and appropriated. Public folklorists wanted to develop interventionist strategies that might blunt mass culture's overwhelming impact on the world's microcultures. Public folklore is rooted in two ideas. One, that cultural diversity, like biodiversity, is critical to the health and well-being of local, regional, and global societies. And two, that public folklorists work in collaborations with collaborations with communities to amplify locally based narratives and traditions and to try to develop cross-cultural understanding. In the world of government arts funding, which is roughly 50 years old, folklife has been drafted in as a fieldwork-driven tool to connect constituencies to public resources. That's the gentlest way of putting it. In other words, after a few years of government arts funding, agencies recognized that they were not equitably serving all residents of the nation, or of the state, or of the city. In particular, urban and rural communities with a high poverty rate, immigrant groups, communities of color, and working class communities. Likewise, the art forms, or the folklife that emerged from these communities, was typically invisible in the grant portfolios of public funders. Beginning in the early 1970s, state folklife programs began to emerge at state arts agencies, using fieldwork as a tool to document folklife, to build public programs that could serve and illuminate folklife practice, to develop grant programs that could fund traditional artists, and as a vehicle to build trust and understanding and relationships between funders and different cultural communities. For the first time in 2022, there will be a state folklife program in every state, region, territory, and in the District of Columbia. It's really hard to express how excited I am about what Howard University and the DC Commission are doing to support folklife in the district. The National Endowment for the Arts is committed to serving this partnership and to help galvanize and amplify the efforts of DC residents who are working in stewardship of DC folklife. Natalie asked me to reflect on why it's important for the government to invest in these kinds of programs and for the private sector too as well. Our work is quite literally public service. In taking a long view, the grant portfolio of any public agency should be a reflection of all of that places, whether it's a nation or a state or a city, of all of its diverse residents. And for a public arts agency, grant making should also acknowledge the importance and brilliance of local vernacular culture. I think one measure is for any resident of a space to look at their public arts agency and to say, do I see myself in here? Do I see myself in what you're supporting? Do I see the cultural forms that are most meaningful to me reflected in what you're doing? One of the most troubling realities of the folklife world is that the field depends almost exclusively on state and federal arts funds for support. There have been times in history when support for folklife from philanthropy has been more robust, and there have been some advances in changing this dynamic, but it really hasn't been the case nationally for some time. So we're working to develop relationships with other funders and with the private sector so that folklife can be ordering from the same menu as the rest of the arts. Likewise, there can be a dynamic in the arts world in which funders feel they have a binary choice to make between contemporary and traditional arts. Some agencies, in trying to build relationships and funding programs for underserved communities, will choose one over the other. I would argue that this is a false choice and that a strong, healthy society is one in which both are served. Okay, I don't want to take up too much time. I've taken enough already. So I'll close just by saying that the coalition of institutions, from Howard University to the DC Commission to public libraries and schools to record stores and local cultural elders that Natalie has helped to build to develop in service of folklife in DC is remarkable. It's inspiring and incredibly important. We're humbled by this collective commitment, inspired by the expansive and dynamic view of folklife. We're proud to support the emergent folklife program at the DC Commission, And we're excited to see how these efforts bear fruit for all of the residents of Washington, D.C. Thank you so much. Again, my apologies for not being there today, and thank you.